Maid's Toddler whispered something. A 36-year-old man worth $4 billion was lying on the cold marble floor of his own mansion, shaking, burning up, completely alone, and not a single person in that house came to help him. Not his personal assistant, who heard the crash and kept walking. Not his executive housekeeper, who saw his door ajar and pulled it shut. Not his driver, his chef, his security team, or the 12 other staff members who worked under his roof and cashed his checks every single Friday without fail. Not one of them knocked. Not one of them asked. Because Dominic Hale had spent years making himself impossible to care about. He had perfected the art of coldness. He had sharpened his silence into a weapon and used it on everyone who got too close. He paid people generously and expected nothing from them except distance and results. And that is exactly what he got. Distance. While he burned. But here's the part nobody saw coming. The part that changed everything. The part that still makes people stop and press a hand to their chest when they hear it. A 3-year-old girl found him first. A tiny girl with pigtails and mismatched socks and a stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. She didn't know he was a billionaire. She didn't know he was feared in boardrooms across 3 continents. She didn't know about the coldness or the walls or the years of carefully constructed isolation. She just knew he looked like he hurt. And so she stayed. But if you're watching from today, are you tuning in from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, India, Germany? Wherever you are in the world right now, I want you to know this story is for you. Because this is a story about what happens when everyone decides someone isn't worth their time and one tiny soul decides differently. Let's get into it. The morning Dominic Hale collapse started like every other morning in the Hale estate, which is to say, it started in complete silence. The estate sat on 11 acres outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. It had been featured in architectural magazines twice. It had 14 rooms, a private gym, a library with floor-to-ceiling shelves, and a kitchen that had been designed by a chef who had cooked for European royalty. It was, by every measurable standard, a magnificent place to live. Dominic hated it. He had bought it 4 years ago because his financial advisor told him real estate of this caliber was a smart diversification of assets. He had moved in with 2 suitcases and a box of books and had never bothered to make it feel like a home. The rooms were furnished, but empty feeling. The walls were painted in tasteful neutral colors that reminded him of hotel lobbies. The whole place smelled faintly of cleaning products and money. He woke at 5:15 every morning, the same as always. His alarm was unnecessary. His body had been conditioned by years of relentless work schedules to wake before the sun regardless of how little sleep he had managed. He lay in bed for exactly 3 minutes, staring at the ceiling, running through the day's priorities in his head. Board meeting at 9. Call with the Tokyo office at noon. Lunch with the acquisitions team, which he was already dreading. A 4 o'clock review of the quarterly numbers, and then, if everything went smoothly, he might be able to sit in his library alone for an hour before bed. That was what passed for pleasure in Dominic Hale's life. 1 quiet hour in a room full of books. He sat up on the 3rd minute and immediately knew something was wrong. The headache hit him like a fist, sudden, vicious, right behind his eyes. He pressed 2 fingers to his temple and breathed through it. He had been ignoring a scratchy throat for 3 days. He had been telling himself it was allergies or stress or the dry air from the heating system. He had been telling himself this because he did not have time to be sick, and in Dominic's experience, things you did not have time for tended to cooperate and disappear. This was not cooperating. He stood up slowly, and the room tilted. He caught the bedpost and held on, breathing steadily, waiting for the dizziness to pass. It took longer than it should have. When he finally made it to the bathroom and looked in the mirror, the man looking back at him was not the controlled, composed person he presented to the world. His face was flushed. His eyes were glassy. There was a fine sheen of sweat on his forehead, even though he had just woken up. He pressed the back of his hand to his own forehead the way he vaguely remembered being done when he was a child, a long time ago, in a different life, by hands that were no longer here to do it. He was burning up. He told himself he would take some medication and push through. He told himself this as he walked to the kitchen, holding the wall twice on the way down the hallway. He told himself this as he opened the cabinet where he kept basic medications and stared at the bottles without being able to focus on the labels. He told himself this right up until the moment his knees gave out, and he went down onto the kitchen floor with a crash that rattled the hanging copper pots above the island. He lay there on the cold marble for a moment, genuinely stunned. In 36 years, Dominic Hale had not asked a single person for help. Not once. Not when his business nearly collapsed at 29. Not when his father died and he sat alone in a hospital waiting room for 7 hours because there was no one to call. Not when the loneliness got so loud some nights that he lay awake until 3 in the morning just staring at the ceiling because the silence felt like it had weight. He had never asked. But lying on that kitchen floor, with the cold marble pressing against his cheek and the room spinning slowly above him, he thought, for the first time in a very long time, that it might be acceptable to need someone. He thought about calling out. He decided against it. He would wait until the dizziness passed and get up on his own. That was what he would do. That was what he always did. What he did not know, what he could not have possibly anticipated, was that the decision had already been made for him. Because down the east hallway in the small staff quarters near the laundry room, a door was opening, and a pair of small feet in mismatched socks were padding quietly across the hardwood floor. And a 3-year-old girl named Lily was on her way to find the orange juice her mother had promised was in the big kitchen, clutching a stuffed rabbit named Button, and completely unaware that she was about to walk into the moment that would change both their lives entirely. She came around the corner. She stopped. She looked at the large man lying on the floor with the kind of open, uncomplicated concern that only very young children are still capable of before the world teaches them to hesitate, to question, to calculate whether caring about someone is worth the risk. She did not hesitate. She walked straight to him, crouched down so her face was level with his, and said, in a voice that was barely louder than a whisper, the 4 words that Dominic Hale would spend the rest of his life thinking about. Does your head hurt? Dominic's first instinct was to tell her he was fine. He had been telling people he was fine for so long that it had stopped feeling like a lie and started feeling like a reflex, as automatic and involuntary as blinking. Someone asked, he answered fine. Conversation ended. Everyone moved on. It was a system that had served him well for the better part of his adult life. But something about looking up at this tiny person, this child with 2 pigtails that were slightly lopsided, one higher than the other, and a stuffed rabbit pressed to her chest, staring at him with enormous dark eyes that held zero judgment and complete, uncomplicated worry, made the word dissolve before he could say it. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He said, very quietly, a little. Lily nodded like this was serious information that required serious consideration. She looked at him for another moment, her small forehead creased with thought. Then she straightened up, still holding Button the rabbit under one arm, and said with great authority, my mama puts cold on foreheads. It helps. Dominic blinked at her. Does it? She was already looking around the kitchen with the focused energy of a child on a mission. You need a cloth. A wet one. She looked back at him. Can you sit up? It was, objectively, a slightly absurd situation. A 36-year-old man who had restructured multinational corporations, who had sat across negotiating tables from people who had tried to dismantle everything he built, was being medically advised by a toddler in dinosaur pajamas. He sat up. The room swam. He pressed a hand to the kitchen island to steady himself and breathed carefully until the worst of it passed. When he looked up again, Lily was standing on her tiptoes at the sink, struggling to reach the faucet. She couldn't quite get there. She tried twice, stretching as far as her small arms would allow, and then she turned and looked at him with an expression of practical frustration. I can't reach, she reported. You have to help. I have to. He almost laughed, which surprised him. He could not remember the last time he had come close to laughing. I'm the one on the floor. I know, Lily said patiently, but I can't reach. There was a logic to this that was difficult to argue with. Dominic braced against the island, got one knee up, and managed to pull himself to his feet. The effort cost him. His head pounded viciously and his vision went briefly dark at the edges, but he steadied himself and reached over Lily to turn on the cold tap. Thank you, she said very seriously. She soaked a small kitchen cloth under the water, wrung it out with surprising competence, her little hands squeezing methodically, the way someone who had watched this done many times would do it. And then she turned and looked up at him with the cloth in her hands and genuine uncertainty on her face. You're too tall, she said. Dominic looked at her. Then, without entirely deciding to, he lowered himself back down to the floor, sitting this time back against the cabinet until he was at a reasonable height. Lily stepped forward without any hesitation. She reached up and pressed the cool cloth to his forehead with both hands, making sure it was properly placed, adjusting it slightly to the left, then nodding with satisfaction. The coolness hit him like relief. Immediate, physical, profound. His eyes closed involuntarily. The pounding behind them didn't stop, but it softened, just enough to breathe around. He did not move. Neither did she. Lily stood in front of him, both small hands still holding the cloth gently to his forehead, button the rabbit dangling from the crook of her elbow. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside the windows, the early morning light was just beginning to gray the sky. Better, she asked. Better, he said, and meant it. She seemed satisfied. She repositioned slightly, getting comfortable in her stance, clearly prepared to stay as long as this required. After a moment, she said, conversationally, I get fevers too sometimes. Do you? Mama stays with me. A pause. She holds my hand. Dominic opened his eyes and looked at this child standing in front of him, this completely unbothered, completely serious, completely kind little person who had wandered into his kitchen and decided without a moment's hesitation that he was worth taking care of. Something in his chest did something strange. Something that felt uncomfortably close to the specific ache of a person who has not been taken care of in a very long time and has forgotten what it feels like until they feel it again. Where is your mama? He asked. Sleeping, Lily said. It's early. She works a lot. She glanced at him with those calm dark eyes. Did you know we live here now? Dominic blinked. He paused. I knew a new housekeeping staff member had started. He had been told this. He had signed the paperwork. He had not paid particular attention to the details. Mama's name is Clara, Lily informed him. She's very good at cleaning. She cleans everything, she considered. She cleaned the whole bathroom in like an hour. I timed her. You timed her? With my dinosaur watch. She showed him her wrist. There was indeed a small plastic watch with a cartoon dinosaur on the face. It goes to 60 and then starts again. Dominic looked at the watch. He looked at this child. He thought about the fact that she had been here, in this house, in that East Wing room, for some number of days, and he had not known. He thought about how many things existed in his own life that he had not known because he had built such careful systems to keep everything at arm's length. Lily, he said, because he realized he knew her name from somewhere. He must have been told. She looked up at him, surprised and pleased. You know my name. I think I was told. I know your name too, she said. You're Mr. Dominic. Mama said to be very quiet and not bother you. She paused. I'm not bothering you, am I? He looked at her. This small person who had come when no one else did, who had not hesitated, who had put a cold cloth on his forehead and held it there with both hands, who had asked him if it was better and waited for the real answer. No, Dominic said. You're not bothering me. Lily smiled at him then, a full, bright, uncomplicated smile, and adjusted the cloth on his forehead again. Good, she said, because I'm not done yet. Clara Rodriguez had been awake since 4:45. She almost always was. It was a habit born of necessity, of years of stretching too few hours across too many obligations, of learning to find the quiet before Lily woke up and use it, because once Lily was awake, the day moved at whatever speed a 3-year-old decided, and that speed was generally somewhere between enthusiastic and chaotic. She lay in bed in the small but clean staff room at the east end of the Hale estate and went over the day's schedule in her head. Strip and replace the linens in the master suite and the 2 guest rooms. Deep clean the main floor bathrooms. Polish the entry hall floor. The estate manager, Mrs. Gaines, had mentioned it twice, which meant it was a priority. Start the laundry rotation by 8. Have something ready for Lily's breakfast by 7:30. She had been working at the Hale estate for 11 days. She had not once seen the man who owned it. This was not unusual, she had been told. Mr. Hale kept to his schedule. He was in his home office by 6:30 and usually left by 7:15. He came home late. He did not interact with household staff beyond necessary communications routed through Mrs. Gaines. He did not want conversation, did not want pleasantries, and most emphatically did not want a child anywhere near his private spaces. That last point had been made very clearly. Clara had explained to Lily, carefully, in the patient and serious tone she used when something genuinely mattered, that Mr. Hale's kitchen was off limits in the early morning, that the main hallways were to be avoided before 8, and that under no circumstances was she to go looking for snacks on her own in a part of the house where she wasn't supposed to be. Lily had listened with the focused attention she brought to all serious conversations. She had also, apparently, gotten thirsty at 5:48 in the morning and decided that the orange juice her mother had pointed to in the big kitchen was a need that could not wait. Clara did not know this yet. She was making herself a cup of instant coffee with a small kettle in the staff room, reviewing the linen schedule in her head, when she heard a sound from the east hallway that made her go still. Voices. 2 of them. One was Lily's. She would know that voice in any crowd, under any noise, from any distance. It was threaded through her like a second heartbeat. The other voice was low, adult, male. Clara set down her coffee cup very carefully and walked into the hallway. The kitchen was at the far end, and she could see, as she got closer, a thin line of light under the door. She pushed it open slowly. What she saw stopped her completely. Dominic Hale, her employer, the man she had been expressly warned not to disturb, was sitting on the kitchen floor with his back against the cabinet, eyes half closed, his face flushed and shining with fever sweat. And Lily was standing in front of him with both hands pressed against a damp cloth on his forehead, explaining something about her dinosaur watch in her most serious voice. Clara's first feeling was pure, cold panic. Her second feeling, arriving about 2 seconds later, when she registered the scene more fully, was something more complicated. Something that didn't have a clean name. Her daughter, who was 3 years old and barely reached this man's shoulder when he was standing, had somehow found him on his kitchen floor and was taking care of him with a complete, unself-conscious confidence she brought to everything she decided mattered. She stepped into the kitchen. Lily heard her immediately and looked up with a bright expression. "Mama, I'm doing the cold cloth, like you showed me." Dominic turned his head. His eyes met Clara's across the kitchen, and even through the obvious illness, the high color in his face, the heaviness in his eyes, she saw something that she had not expected to find there at all. He looked almost embarrassed. "I apologize," he said. His voice was rough, strained around the edges. I came to help," Lily said firmly, clarifying the record. "She came to help," Dominic said. And there was something in the way he said it, quietly, without irony, without the detached tone she had been warned to expect from him, that made Clara go still all over again. She crossed the kitchen. She crouched down and looked at him directly. This was not a situation where professional distance felt appropriate, and pressed the back of her hand to his forehead the way she would have with Lily. He went very still at the contact. She felt the heat coming off him even before her hand landed. It was significant. Not dangerously so. Not yet. But real and serious, and definitely not something that was going to resolve itself if he tried to push through and make his 9 o'clock meeting. "How long have you been feeling this way?" she asked. "This morning. Though I've had a sore throat for a few days." Clara looked at him steadily. Do you have a thermometer? Any fever medication? Somewhere. Mrs. Gaines handles. I'll find it, Clara said. She stood. She looked at Lily, who was still holding the cloth to Dominic's forehead with both hands. The look on her small face, the specific expression of someone who has been given an important job and intends to take it seriously. Can you stay with Mr. Dominic for 1 minute? Clara asked her. Lily's eyes went wide with responsibility. Yes, she said solemnly. Clara went to find what she needed, and Dominic Hale sat on the floor of his own kitchen, in the care of a 3-year-old with a dinosaur watch, and did not say a word about wanting to be left alone. Because for the first time in longer than he could clearly remember, he didn't. Clara found a thermometer in the master bathroom medicine cabinet along with ibuprofen, a half-used pack of throat lozenges, and a small pharmacy's worth of untouched cold medicine still in their boxes. She stood in the bathroom doorway for a moment looking at those unopened boxes, each one purchased, she guessed, at some point when he had felt something coming on, and told himself he would use them if it got bad enough, while simultaneously operating under the private assumption that it would not get bad enough because getting too sick was a thing that happened to other people. She recognized this particular brand of self-neglect. She had seen it before. She had practiced it herself in harder years, when admitting you needed rest felt like a luxury you could not afford. She brought everything back to the kitchen. Dominic had managed, in her absence, to shift from the floor to a kitchen chair. Lily had apparently supervised this relocation with some authority, because she was standing next to the chair still holding Button the rabbit and watching him with the focused attention of a very small medical professional. Okay, Lily was saying as Clara came in. You have to stay still. I am staying still, Dominic said. You moved your head. Slightly. I almost dropped the cloth. Clara set everything on the kitchen counter and poured a glass of water from the tap. She brought the thermometer to Dominic, who accepted it without protest, which told her something about how he was feeling, because she suspected that Dominic Hale, under normal circumstances, would have significantly more resistance to being managed. They waited. Lily used the waiting time to explain to Dominic the full medical history of Button the rabbit, who had apparently suffered a serious arm injury 6 months ago. A seam had come undone and had required surgery. Her mother had resewn it and was now fully recovered. Does Button get fevers? Dominic asked. Lily considered this. Once, she said, but he's a rabbit, so I don't take his temperature. I just feel his ears. She demonstrated on Button. His ears feel normal. Good to know. The thermometer beeped. Clara read it, kept her expression even, and said, 103.1. Dominic looked at the number like it had personally offended him. I have a board meeting at 9, he said. You have a fever at 103, Clara said. I can push through. Mr. Hale. Clara's voice was calm, unhurried, and completely firm. It was the same voice she used with Lily, when Lily suggested that perhaps bedtime was optional. You were on the floor 40 minutes ago. Your body is fighting something significant. Pushing through a meeting today means being sicker tomorrow, and even sicker the day after that. She set the ibuprofen and the glass of water on the table in front of him. This will help bring the fever down. You need to drink all of that water, and then you need to go back to bed. A silence. Dominic looked at the glass. He looked at the ibuprofen. He looked at Clara, who was looking back at him with the calm certainty of someone who is not going to be argued out of this. He looked at Lily, who was nodding slowly with the air of someone who fully endorsed everything that had just been said. He took the ibuprofen. Clara refilled the glass without being asked. He drank it. He set the glass down and looked, briefly, like a man who was profoundly unused to being taken care of and did not entirely know what to do with the experience. My assistant will need to be notified, he said. Tell me her name and I'll handle it. He looked at her. I've worked in household management for 8 years, Clara said, not unkindly. I can send a professional message to an assistant explaining that you're unwell and your morning schedule needs to be cleared. It's not complicated. Another beat of silence. Patricia, he said finally. Patricia Cole. Her number is in my phone. It's on the kitchen counter. She'll be upset. I can manage upset, Clara said. Lily, feeling that the situation was well in hand, had climbed into the chair next to Dominic and was arranging Button the rabbit on the table in front of her with great seriousness. I'm going to make you soup, she announced. Dominic looked at her. You're 3. Mama will make it, Lily clarified patiently. I'll watch. Clara looked at her daughter. This small, certain, completely loving person who had walked into this kitchen this morning and simply decided that the large sick man on the floor was someone worth caring for, with zero calculation and zero hesitation, and felt the specific, piercing tenderness that came with being Lily's mother. The feeling that she had somehow, in the middle of a very difficult few years, managed to raise someone whose heart was larger and braver than anything Clara could take credit for. She looked at Dominic, who was watching Lily arrange Button's position on the table with an expression that Clara could not quite name. It was not the detached coldness she had been warned to expect. It was something rawer than that. Something that looked almost like a man recognizing, in real time, what he had been missing. I'll make soup, Clara said. But first, bed. Lily will come check on you in an hour. Lily looked up immediately. I will. If that's all right with Mr. Hale. They both looked at him. Dominic Hale, who had spent years making himself unreachable, who had structured his entire existence around the premise that needing people was a vulnerability he could not afford, looked at a 3-year-old girl and her stuffed rabbit and a woman he had employed for 11 days and barely registered as a person, and said, very quietly, that would be all right. By 10 o'clock that morning, the Hale estate felt different. Clara could feel it, some subtle shift in the quality of the silence, the way a room can change its character when the person in it changes theirs. She had worked in enough large houses to know that the atmosphere of a home tracked its owner's emotional state more closely than most people realized. Happy households felt loose and warm. Tense ones felt held-breath and careful. This house had always felt, in the 11 days she'd been here, like a place where someone was perpetually bracing for something. This morning it felt like something had relaxed. She had called Patricia, who had been, as predicted, upset, and then efficient, and then quietly concerned in a way that suggested she had been waiting for something like this for a while. She had cleared the morning, rescheduled the afternoon with careful strategic messaging to the relevant parties, and asked, in a tone that she was clearly working to keep professional, whether he was being taken care of. Yes, Clara said. He is. A brief pause. Good, Patricia said. He won't say so, but good. Clara had made stock from scratch using what was in the kitchen, which was stocked with the kind of quality ingredients that accumulate when a professional chef has purchasing authority. She'd built the base slowly, added vegetables, simple noodles, a careful amount of seasoning. She'd brewed a pot of ginger tea. She'd sliced bread. Lily had sat on the kitchen counter, with permission, which was an unusual privilege that made her extremely proud, and supervised all of this. Carrots, Lily said. I think that's enough carrots. Mr. Dominic might like carrots. We don't actually know if Mr. Dominic likes carrots. Lily considered this. I'll ask him when I bring it. At 10:30, Clara carried a tray up to the master suite. Lily walked beside her with great ceremony, holding Button and what she had decided was her contribution, a drawing she had done in approximately 12 minutes on the back of a piece of printer paper. It was, she explained, a picture of Button feeling better after being sick. It was meant to be encouraging. Clara knocked on the door. Come in. He was in bed, which Clara counted as a victory. She had half expected to find him at his desk on a laptop, conducting a meeting through sheer force of stubbornness. He was sitting up against the headboard with his eyes closed, and when they opened at her knock, they were clearer than they had been that morning. The ibuprofen was working, but still heavy, still shadowed. The master suite was enormous and aggressively impersonal. No photographs. No objects that suggested a life outside of work. A few books on the nightstand, but nothing else that indicated anything about who he was when he wasn't being Dominic Hale, the billionaire. It had the quality of a very expensive hotel room, beautiful and completely anonymous. Clara set the tray on the nightstand. Lily came to stand at the side of the bed and held up the drawing. "I made you this," she said. "It's Button. He was sick once too, and he got better. See, this is him being sick, and this is him being better." She pointed to two roughly circular shapes, one horizontal, one vertical. "Being better is when he's standing up." Dominic took the drawing. He looked at it for a long moment. "That's Button standing up," he said. He looks good. He feels good," Lily confirmed. "He was very brave." Dominic held the drawing. Something moved across his face, something quick and contained, the way a strong feeling looks when a person isn't used to having them in company. He folded the drawing carefully and set it on the nightstand next to the books. "Thank you, Lily." "You're welcome." She climbed, without asking, onto the chair beside the bed that Clara had moved there from the corner. She settled in with Button. "I'm going to sit here while you eat your soup. You don't have to." "I want to," Lily said simply. Clara watched Dominic look at her daughter. She watched him look at the soup, at the tea, at the drawing on the nightstand. She watched him do the thing that she was beginning to recognize, that brief internal negotiation between the person he had made himself and some older, quieter version of himself who remembered what warmth felt like. "Clara," he said. "Yes." He looked at her. His voice was still rough from the fever. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," she said. "I mean," he paused, looked for words in the careful way of a man who had spent years editing his emotional vocabulary down to the minimum. "This isn't part of your job description." Clara looked at him steadily. "Maybe not. But you were sick and alone, and my daughter was worried about you." She pulled the chair slightly closer to the bed for Lily and checked the temperature of the tea with her wrist. "So here we are." He was quiet for a moment. "Here we are," he said. He ate the soup. Lily narrated the story of Button's arm injury in full, with sound effects. Clara sat in the other chair and drank a cup of tea and let the room be warm and quiet and human for a while. And Dominic Hale, who had not eaten a meal in company in longer than he could accurately recall, ate every last drop of his soup. And when he set the bowl down, he looked at the small drawing of a rabbit standing up on his nightstand and kept it there. 3 weeks later, the estate felt like a different place entirely. It had started small, the way all real changes do, not with dramatic moments, but with small shifts that accumulate so quietly you don't notice them until you look back and realize how far you've traveled. It had started with Dominic asking, on the second day of his recovery, if Lily could come back. Not asking Clara, exactly, more stating it carefully, in the way of a man who was unaccustomed to expressing preferences out loud. She mentioned she wanted to show me something she'd drawn. Clara had sent Lily, who had arrived with 3 drawings, a rock she had found in the garden that she considered very interesting, and Button. They had spent 45 minutes together. Clara had stood in the hallway for part of it and listened. She had heard Lily's voice, high and certain and full of the particular energy she brought to things she cared about. She had heard Dominic's voice, lower, quieter, asking questions with genuine curiosity. She had heard him laugh once, a short, surprised sound, like a person encountering something they hadn't expected to find funny and couldn't quite stop themselves. She had gone back to the kitchen before her face could do anything that needed explaining. Over the following days, a routine had developed with no discussion and no planning. Lily, who was accustomed to the rhythm of her mother's work schedule, had identified that Mr. Dominic ate breakfast alone at the kitchen table from 8 to 8:20 before his workday began. She had decided, with characteristic Lily logic, that this was an inefficient use of breakfast and that it would be better for everyone if she joined him. Clara had found out about this arrangement when she came to the kitchen one morning and found the two of them at the table, Dominic in his work clothes, Lily in her pajamas and dinosaur watch, eating cereal, while Lily gave him a detailed account of a dream she'd had about a horse. He had been listening, not politely, actually listening. Clara had backed out of the kitchen before either of them saw her and stood in the hallway and breathed for a moment. She told herself the feeling in her chest was just relief, that her daughter was safe and happy, that she hadn't gotten them fired by wandering into someone's kitchen and appointing herself as nurse. Practical, sensible relief. She was a careful woman. She had learned to be careful. She had a daughter to protect and a job she needed and a landlord who could not be paid in good intentions. She could not afford to misread things or romanticize things or allow the warmth of a few kind moments to blur the very clear lines of what this situation was. He was her employer. She was his housekeeper. She kept to those lines. What she could not entirely control was the fact that Dominic, in the weeks that followed his recovery, had quietly and without announcement started changing. It was visible in small things. He began saying good morning when he passed her in the hallway, actually saying it, not a nod, a full greeting. He had asked one afternoon if Lily's cough was better. She'd had a minor cold. He had apparently noticed. He had told Patricia to note in the estate schedule that the East Wing was Lily's space in the early afternoons and was not to be allocated for any external meetings. He had installed a small step stool next to the kitchen sink for the faucet, so Lily could reach it. Clara had stood in front of that step stool for a full minute the morning she noticed it. She had not said anything about it. She had gone back to work and told herself it was just a practical decision, and she was not going to make it into something it wasn't. That evening, she was folding laundry in the East Wing when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Not Lily's. Lily was asleep. These were slower, deliberate. She looked up. Dominic was in the doorway. He had clearly just come from his office, still in his work clothes, jacket removed, sleeves rolled to the elbow. He looked like a man who had been doing something difficult for several hours and had decided, midway through, to do something else instead. I wanted to, he stopped. There's something I should say. Clara set down the shirt she was folding and waited. I didn't handle things well, he said. Here. In this house. I made a point of not knowing the people who worked for me. Not because I thought they didn't matter. I think because he paused again. Looked for the right words with the same careful patience she had noticed was characteristic of him. Because knowing people means losing them. And I had. Another pause. I'd lost enough. Clara looked at him. Lily came and put her hands on my forehead, he said, and I could not remember the last time someone had done something like that. Something that simple. He looked at the floor, then back at her. I've been thinking about that for 3 weeks. She's very hard to say no to, Clara said softly. She is. He looked at her more directly now. She gets that from someone. The laundry room was quiet. Outside, the estate was dark and still. I'm not asking for anything that would put you in a difficult position, Dominic said. He said it carefully, like a man who had prepared this part. You work here, and I want that to stay clean and professional and protected. What I'm asking, what I hope, is just that you don't keep your distance from this house. That you let it be somewhere you both feel, he stopped. Somewhere you both feel at home. Clara looked at this man, this careful, solitary, quietly breaking open person who had built $4 billion worth of success and had not known what to do with a 3-year-old putting her hands on his forehead, and felt the particular ache of recognizing someone. I think, she said, that might already be happening. He looked at her. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but something close. Something that was learning the shape of one. 6 months later, Lily showed people 3 things she was very proud of. One was her dinosaur watch. One was a drawing she had done that Mr. Dominic kept framed on his desk, of buttons standing up after being sick. And one was a photograph, taken by Clara on a Sunday morning in the estate kitchen, of Lily sitting on the counter supervising breakfast, button on her lap, one small hand resting on Dominic's arm while he cooked, her head tipped toward his shoulder. She looked like a child who had always known she was exactly where she belonged. And the man beside her, who had spent years perfecting the art of being unreachable, was smiling. Not the careful, measured expression he showed the world. The real one, the kind that starts in the eyes. The kind that comes from a cold cloth on a forehead and a 3-year-old who decided, without any hesitation at all, that he was worth taking care of. And tell me where you're watching from. Stories like